The 6 stages of change when leaving an unhealthy relationship. I like this one, bro.
Yeah, it's a good topic. It falls in line with, it comes from drug use and how to quit a drug, which is bad for you. So it falls
Which
in
is
line.
bad for you.
Yeah, with like
Thank
leaving.
you for clarifying.
Yeah,
man.
thank you, man. That's why I'm here, man.
How to quit a drug, which is bad for you?
Exactly.
All
Just
right.
like leaving a bad relationship, an
Okay.
unhealthy relationship.
Okay. Well, let's get into this.
All right.
Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pye.
I'm Dr. Glen.
Now, when Dr. Glen and I say relationships, we mean all of them, starting with the one with yourself and working on outwards. And today's focus is basically leaving an unhealthy relationship. But what we've noticed is that we've had a lot of different clients and, personal experiences where people come asking for advice and they're at these different places in their relationship. Like sometimes somebody is asking and they just simply want validation. Am I making the right decision? But it almost looks like they want help. They'll come to you and they'll say things like, I'd like to know how to fix my marriage. Shortly into it, then you discover, you're not actually learning how to fix it. You're wanting validation for leaving it. And they're kind of at these different places of basically leaving an unhealthy relationship, right?
Yeah, or it could be the flip side where they're like, oh, I really want to leave this toxic relationship. But the more you talk to them, they have no desire to leave whatsoever.
They haven't started anything. They're not
doing anything. They just want to be heard. And that's all that they want. They just want a person to listen to them, but they're not going to leave.
So this mirrors a study from drug addiction?
Yeah, so it's called the stages of change. So it's D. Clemente and Prochaska.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, people go through stages when they're quitting a drug. Like a drug is something that's really unhealthy for you. But they go through these stages of overvaluing the drug.
Well, specifically a drug addiction.
A drug addiction.
Unhealthy.
Yeah.
Drugs are good, bro.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of them.
No, that's true. Okay. Drug addiction. Drug addiction. Bad drugs. But yeah, to wean off of that addiction and to move to a healthier space, you have to go through your stages. And relationships follow the same thing because it can be very addicting as well.
It's kind of fascinating. It's fascinating too how the kind of emotional impact of relationships can almost mirror drugs in
it mirrors addiction
in similar ways.
That's why, when you go to detox, if a person goes to detox, they have to go to a month to clear their mind and brain.
Yeah.
To feel normal again after the drug use, right? Because they have to filter it out. Same thing with relationships, especially toxic ones. You need a month to detox and then undo all the residue and all that's been built up so that you can become more normal again.
Okay, residue, that sounds gross, first of all. But yeah, no, you're right. Like where you can actually end a relationship and then you have that it almost feels like an addiction where you want that hit. Like I gotta call, I gotta go if back. I can just see the person, if I can just, one last time. And then each time it kind of renews it, right? Where you don't really get over it. That's why you need this period to kind of disconnect and then start addressing it.
Yeah. Like you're saying, like drug addiction, the first high is always the best and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's about maintaining the addiction. Mm-hmm. Unhealthy relationships are the same thing. There's a high and it just gets worse and worse. One more conversation. If this person just understands this, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it just becomes about maintaining the addiction versus actually changing.
Yeah. That's a weird place to be though. I have stories here.
Oh, awesome.
Plenty of stories.
Beautiful.
But let's get into number 1. So what is the first stage then?
So the first stage is known as pre-contemplation. So basically what this means is this person values staying in the toxic relationship more than leaving and being their own person, right? So in their mind, even though people are like, man, you're isolating yourself. You're suffering at work. You're depressed all the time. You're drinking more. You're isolating from your family. And it's obvious that this relationship is taking a toll. In their mind, staying with this person is still the best choice because it makes me happy. They bring me, companionship, and I'm with this person. You guys don't understand. So they're overvaluing the relationship versus really looking at it and all the consequences that it's causing them.
Yeah. This can also be kind of negative self-talk too, right? Like if I were to, this friend is the only person that really understands me and nobody else can really understand me like this. And so I'm going to stay, even though the friend's not nice, like it's not a good friendship. And similarly, I think this happens more often than not in romance, but how often do you kind of, there's nobody else that would love me the way that they do. I'm not worthy of that love, or I'm not going to be able to find somebody else, or whatever it might be. But there's so many of these kind of, you overvalue the positive aspects, and then you kind of self-deprecate to kind of say, I deserve this.
No, you overvalue the little that you're getting and you undervalue the consequences that are taking place.
Yeah. Or you undervalue your own strengths and your own, self.
Yeah, and this is like using the drug analogy. Basically, like if you're addicted to cocaine, it's like me saying like, gosh, the high is so great. I socialize with my friends. It makes me be who I am more. But they're not talking about the consequences. I lost my job.
Or
I'm losing money. I have an I'm suffering from all this addiction, right? Like it's just foregoing all that because they just value the cocaine, or they value that relationship more than anything else. And this phase is known as the emotional leech.
mm-hmm.
So do you know people like that? Like a friend will come to you and they're like, man, I need to talk to you. And then you're like, yeah, you should leave the relationship. It's so bad. And they're like, yeah, but, and then they just keep counter arguing.
Yeah.
All they want is just to suck your emotions out. They just want to be heard. And all they're going to do is they're not going to leave. They're not ready to leave the relationship. They're not ready to stop the drug. So they're just going to stay. All they want is a person that's just going to listen to them. They are a leech.
That's a very common scenario. And usually the person that's in this pre-contemplation stage, you can easily identify it, because that person is having the same conversation with, you might think you're special till you find out that they're having that same conversation with like 20 other people.
Exactly. They're
on repeat.
On repeat, they're going around. And then, not to be an ass, but the person that does it, they look like they're on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Like cocaine is good. Yeah, it's great. It's great, mm-hmm. right? And then when they talk to you, there's a desperation. Yeah, this relationship's so good, right? It's good, right? It's justified, right? And they're just going around in this kind of desperate, addicted state.
Okay, see if you can find out where this quote's from. Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Rick James. I'm Rick James, bitch. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Okay, yes. Let's get to do we have number one, pre-contemplation? We know we're kind of in that phase where staying is overvalued beyond leaving the relationship. And the other crazy piece too is, in that place, you're going to tend to almost, like when you look at the costs of leaving, you will overemphasize the costs of leaving and not really compare against the cost of staying. And the wild thing about this is that the cost of leaving, those things don't really change, right? When you leave a toxic relationship, it doesn't matter whether it's now or whether it's going to be later, you're going to deal with the same stuff. The disconnection, you're going to have to deal with the same exact thing, the process of, going through rebuilding your identity and doing whatever it is. But the cost of staying is one that actually increases. And in this state of pre-contemplation, we tend to kind of undervalue or underweigh the cost of staying and overweigh the cost of leaving, when in reality it's flip-flop. The cost of staying goes up every single day.
Agreed. But then they're just not in that space. So that's why it's called the not ready stage. So this person is not ready to leave. They're not ready to change. They're just an emotional leech. So if you're that person, just admit that you're not ready. If you're the friend, instead of arguing with them and spending hours trying to convince them, then you shouldn't change.
Yeah.
You're just like, you shouldn't change. You've convinced me, you should stay.
When you're ready to chat about this, or when you're ready to make a decision, let me know.
You still got work to do, so you should stay. You've convinced me to stay, and you just leave it at that.
That's an interesting way, because it kind of ends the conversation. They're like, oh, well, okay.
But think about it this way, though, from a friendship standpoint. Like, let's say I'm that person, I'm in the pre-contemplation stage, and I went to 10 other people, and they're doing the arguing with me, and then I go to you, Pye, and you're like, you know what, bro? You should stay then.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm getting ready to change, out of the 11 people I went to, who do you think I'm going to go to when I'm ready to change? You. Because you were the one that actually set boundaries with me, and then you're showing me a healthy dynamic. So once I become healthier, I will go to you.
Okay. So stage 2 then.
Stage 2 is known as contemplation. So once again, pre-contemplation, that you overvalue the toxic relationship versus your individuality. Contemplation is now, it becomes more 50-50. Like, it becomes equal. Like, man, like I could see how damaging it is in my life, but I still love this person. So they're like 50-50 on the fence about whether to stay or leave. Right? So the drug analogy, cocaine, like, man, it feels good. And I have my friends, but at the same time, like, I'm getting really sick in the morning. Blood's coming out my nose, right? Like, my family and friends, I haven't seen them in a while. I'm getting more sick. Okay, yeah, maybe this isn't the best choice for me anymore.
What does that look like from the outside when they're in that stage?
So they're more open. So like when, if you're like, hey man, like you're not looking good, or like maybe you need to stop, instead of getting defensive, they'll be less defensive and they'll be like, no, you're right. I think I need to look into it more. So there's an openness and ability. This is where emotional expansion comes in. Pre-contemplation, they're closed off. They're only going to see what they're going to see. Contemplation, now they're opening up mentally and emotionally and seeing the good and the bad. And they're able to kind of at least conceptualize it. They're not going to take action, but they're willing to talk about it.
Yeah, that's the interesting side. That the easiest way for me to see the difference in those two mindsets is basically in pre-contemplation. They're going to bring to you the idea, the challenge. Hey, should I end this? But then they're going to defend everything that you say.
Correct.
So whatever you say, they have a counter argument and they're going to play the devil's advocate of why they should be there. And then in this contemplation stage, that stops. It's basically, well, this is going on, this is happening. And then there's acknowledgement of, well, yeah, that is happening.
Yeah, so this is what's known as the psychoeducation stage, meaning that I'm not ready to take action yet, but I'm willing to have the conversation.
Willing to start learning.
I'm willing to start listening, and I'm willing to start evaluating if I'm going to make this move or not. Yeah, so it's a different stage. So this is like the next stage of growth, because now the relationship was everything, and then now it's like, okay, maybe not so much anymore.
The crazy part about this is, at least from the experiences that I've had, from the case studies that I've had, it seems like the only thing driving them from stage to stage is just pain. Basically, like going, like you receive, at some point, you start to feel it, you start to acknowledge the pain that you're getting, and you move to the next stage.
Yeah, there's that saying, pain pushes until vision pulls, right? So until you actually see a healthier future and that vision becomes more clear, then pain is just going to constantly drive you until, okay, both my noses are bleeding now.
Yeah.
And it's coming out my eye. Okay, maybe I should
do something about it.
Maybe I should contemplate this a little bit more, right?
Yeah, that's the crazy part is if you can get yourself, like, they say that the pain of staying has to be greater than the pain of leaving, right? If you can get yourself to understand that a little bit quicker, you can save yourself so much time and emotional trauma and just everything in this process.
Yeah, I mean that's a sign of a healthy person. But if you have to work to get to that place, this is basically what happens, right? Like you have to learn through experience.
It's difficult because I feel like I had to work through that. It took me 14 years to work through those stages.
Yeah, I mean it took me a lifetime.
Yeah.
To be able to, like, in my own relationships, I would defend my behaviors, and then try to justify it, even to the healthy friends that were trying to help me out. And then later on, it's like, man, like, what am I doing? Like, I need to make better decisions for myself. This is not good for me.
Okay. So then you get to the preparation stage.
So the preparation stage, so I've had the conversation. So now I've come to you, Pye, hey man, I'm going to make some changes. Like, dude, you used to have 2 nostrils. You only have 1 now, right? So like, I'm like, okay, so now I think I'm going to leave. So this is where, like, I'm still not going to act, but I'm about a month away from actually leaving the relationship. So like the contemplation was like usually like a significant event that took place. Or like, man, this person just screwed me over the one last time. And then now it's like, okay, I could see potentially the good and the bad. Preparation is like, okay, I am planning my exit. And it's just figuring out how I'm going to do this.
It's interesting. I feel like I was in the pre-contemplation stages and even contemplation for years, because in I would say I was in the contemplation stages. Pre-contemplation, I was at a place where I was still willing to defend, right? But I was probably at contemplation for, I don't know, 7 to 10 years. And it was the people around me that kept encouraging, kept saying, the people that didn't know, my own personal situation and what was going on. But they would say, this is you. This is on you to fix. This is, the other person's good. You should be doing this. Susie is a person that, this. And they would defend and kind of encourage me to continue with it. So would you say that I was still stuck in contemplation?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you were not ready to act, right? And then I think you told the story where there was that moment where you're like, okay, this is it. I'm ready to make this decision. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to think about it anymore. That became like the preparation to take action.
That felt like that took 14 years to get to that place.
Yeah.
And it was It was 1 or 2 years in pre-contemplation, the majority in contemplation. And then once it got to preparation, I was a month away, 2 months away.
So if we kind of go through like the stages that we kind of went through right now, pre-contemplation, how long do you think you were in that stage for when it came to your first marriage?
I was probably willing to defend it for 4 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Do you feel like you're an emotional leech at that time too? Like you're going from person to person trying to justify it if people are like, hey man, this isn't good for you. Would you still defend it?
I would say that there was a few people that I would talk to about it. When I got to the stages of contemplation, then there was more.
What was the point where you switched to contemplation? Was there an event or was it just, okay, yeah, I just don't see this as being good anymore?
I think I brought up that analogy of like that first time that we separated for a good amount of time when I was working. That was when everything shifted from pre-contemplation to contemplation, when I was actually legitimately thinking about it. And then I would say it was during that stage that I was talking to people a lot, but it wasn't that many people I was talking to, like my closest friends, Justin and maybe one or two others. And then it was the ecclesiastical leaders that I would speak to.
And then in your mind, you're just trying to weigh it out. Like, is this worth it? The costs and the benefits of staying and leaving.
Yeah, I was trying to see it and understand it I was trying to understand it objectively. Like, is this how it should be? And I was getting nothing but encouragement from everybody that this is the way that it is. This is how it should be. This is good. So that was going on.
Was there an addictive quality to it, you think? Like the addiction to the pain and the addiction to the drama?
I don't know if I would call it addiction. I felt that in a different relationship. I felt that. But in this one, it was more so, it felt normal to me. Like I think I described that, like coming from parents that, it was similar to the relationship that my parents had. So it felt normal.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say that there was maybe a high to the fighting, and not even though. Yeah. But again, my use case compared to the 500 plus case studies that we've gone through, I find that mine was the most extreme, because going into a different relationship and looking at our case studies, I can see this play out in a much shorter time span, usually like a 6 month to 1 year time frame. And you see all those. And I felt that very directly in a different relationship where, yeah, I was in the contemplation stage. And then in that stage, I was like talking to quite a few people, trying to figure things out, and then going through the preparation process. But it was sped up, 100-fold.
Yeah, I mean, but you were in that contemplation stage for such a long time that once you made the decision, like it just accelerated.
Then it was quick. It was like once the decision was made, it was, this is the next step. This doesn't work. This is the next step. I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah, like for me, I feel like I was in the pre-contemplation stage for a long existence of my life, from friends, job choices, everything that I was doing was mimicking this, defending this unhealthy dynamic that I was living in.
Sure.
And then it was like a drug. Like I could literally look at this friend, something about that person I really like, but it would just be another toxic relationship.
Because yes, I could see this in my friendships very, very much, this framework.
Yeah. And then learning how to because ultimately all this, the stages of change means regardless of the people around you and whether they stay or leave you, you have to develop your own independence. And that's what this basically means.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a stage of developing complete independence and being able to move on.
Okay. So in stage 3 then, what do we have then?
So now the benefits of leaving the relationship is greater than staying in this toxic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
They're initiating the changes. Now they're self-motivated. So it's not about being convinced, like in the pre-contemplation or arguing. It's not about educating yourself, weighing the pros and cons. Now the decision has been made, and they're preparing. They're usually a month away from leaving. So they're preparing to action.
So it's not unusual to spend the majority of that time in these stage 1 and stage 2 then.
Yeah, it's not. And then this preparation stage, it's a mixture of kind of mourning too, because you're kind of getting ready, man, this is going to be painful to leave.
Mm-hmm.
You've weighed out the pros and the cons of everything. So there's just this emotional preparation that takes place before you're ready to take action and actually leave.
Mm.
So you're really mentally and emotionally preparing to have the conversation, and then there's no going back. There's no recourse. This is it.
It's interesting that I feel like in that preparation stage is oftentimes the place where people will, particularly in like a marriage and romantic situation, it's in the preparation phase where they actually start looking for counseling or support.
Yeah, they'll start looking for counseling, and then using the drug analogy, this is where the person goes to detox for a month.
Yeah.
They go away for a month. They isolate. They they wean themselves off of the drug, right? So that they're more clear, and then they can come back and then start reliving their life.
But it's so strange because at that point, it's almost too late. Like if you're in most instances where I feel like somebody is coming to the door going, okay, I could use some coaching now. And they're in this preparation stage. I'm going, this is going to be tough because you don't realize it, but the decisions have already been made. The way that you're talking, the way that you're speaking, the decisions have already been made.
Oh, you mean as a couple?
They come as a couple to kind of like work through it. But in reality, their mindsets and the way that they are acting and the way that they're speaking is as if it's already a done deal.
Yeah, but I mean, not to give names, but there's a situation like this right now where one person is already in the preparation stage, the other person, they're pre-contemplating. And so it's basically in these sessions saying like, look, this is where both of you are at.
Yeah.
And it's letting that person know that nothing's going to change at this point. You need to get yourself ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing. And that's the other aspect of it is that when you're looking at a relationship, when you're looking at a couple, both people can be at two different stages of this process. And so what often happens, one of the things that we talked about when we talked about reasons why counseling often fails, one of those reasons is because they come to the table too late. You know, they come to the table where one person's already in the preparation stage or even in the leaving stage where they're actually putting it into action. And then they're coming and saying, well, we want to do everything we can to make this work. They say the words, but their actions don't follow those words because one person is already done. They've already checked out.
No, that's true. And in this example, though, usually it's one person is willing to change, the other person isn't. And that's why it's going like one person staying in pre-contemplation, the other one is preparing to leave because it's not a mutual thing at this point. And there's no other choice. At that point, if the other person is not willing to grow with you, you should leave. The healthy decision is to go off on your own.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. So then we get to stage 4. We actually start putting it into action.
So the action stage. So this is where leaving far outweighs staying. So now the pros of being your own person is far greater than leaving, and your identity starts to change. So this is where it's like 6 months or more. You've broken up. You're on your own. And then you're starting to see how unhealthy that relationship was, and you're starting to build your own individual identity again.
There's a lot of anger I find in this stage. This is where I feel like a lot of our clients, a lot of our people will be locked into just how much they lost, how much they regret, how much they are angry and frustrated, and they need to talk about it. Like I feel like it almost goes back to the pre-contemplation phase where they have to again voice this to a lot of friends and other people, where in this stage of action it feels like again they're voicing it, but they're voicing something different. They're voicing how bad it was and all of that,
but also they're voicing the gratitude of getting their individual identity back.
Yeah.
And then so for example, once again going back to the drug analogy, I was a cocaine user to now all of a sudden I'm a healthy person that goes to the gym. I have a healthy diet, right? I'm hanging out with really healthy people that don't use. So that becomes their identity in that action stage. So there's a transition of like mourning and being angry and then processing how they were, but also being grateful for this new person now. They're becoming this healthier version of themselves.
So when it's not gratitude, when it's more so anger, would you say that they're still mourning? What are they doing in that phase?
That's like the transition. I think more the anger comes in the preparation stage. Like at that stage before you're ready to move, if you're mourning and you're like, man, I'm so pissed off that I waited this long. I can't believe that I let myself go through this for this many years. I hate myself for that. I have to go. And that becomes a motivator to leave.
But I can count right now probably 5 examples where they actually had left and we're still going through that process. And I'm one of them. And I have multiple cases where I can look at and see the person that has actually left and they are still angry and talking about everything that they lost and they haven't moved on yet. There's still something there. But they've already done the action. You know what I'm saying? Like they've already left.
But I mean, I think that's a part of where they still, I mean, this is a general statement, but they still haven't fully identified with the healthier parts of themselves.
Hmm.
It's like me, once again, the drug analogy. I'm taking the actions, but in my heart of hearts, I still feel like I'm a cocaine user,
Mm.
and I still value going to the parties. And now I'm trying to figure out if how can I still go back to that, but then still have a healthy lifestyle type of thing. And I think there's like a struggle in that.
You know what's interesting? I find that this model is very similar also to people who leave a religion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it's almost the exact same thing. And I'll bet, I don't know if there's studies that we can reference right now. I don't know of any, but I'll bet if you looked at it, the psychological components of that religion are very similar to, again, drug addiction and to, again, a toxic relationship where you can create the action and they can leave that religion, that thing. And then there's this lingering resentment, this lingering anger towards it that they haven't fully gotten over.
No, I agree, but you got married so young, right? So like that your 20s is the stage of like trying to know who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And but isn't it fair to say like a lot of the resentment because you're trying to figure out who you were as a healthier person, but once you figure that out and then you started identifying yourself with healthier things, especially relationships, that's where the resentment started to go away. Is that a fair comment to make?
I guess. But I guess the other side of that is how much time was, I think in most of these cases, it's the person looking and saying how much time was lost in that thing, whether it be a religion, whether it be a toxic relationship, whatever it might be, how much time was lost in that world. And that's the piece that they hold on to.
No, I agree. I mean, the action, it doesn't mean like it's this neat thing where like you don't have resentment, but I think the point is that you're identifying and grateful that you're just not in that space anymore.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. I mean,
Yeah.
they're in this mixture of like, I'm so grateful that this isn't who I am anymore and this isn't what I have to deal with.
But
But at the
there's
same time, I can't believe that I stayed that long.
and there's a resentment piece. And
Correct.
this is where forgiveness has to come into play too.
Yeah.
Self-forgiveness, like, okay, at least I'm here
Mm-hmm.
and at least I can move on and I'm going to take the lessons and I'm going to make the best of my life moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is like 6 months in. So this is like really fresh. But you're starting to identify with the healthier components of being single and seeing the better parts of your healthier self.
So from here we go to stage 5, which is the maintenance side, right?
So this is where like now being your own individual far outweighs being in a toxic relationship.
Mm.
And this is where you start to identify your new identity.
Mm-hmm.
So all your identity is not about the drug, like the drug analogy. It's not about cocaine. It's not about the friends. It's not about partying. It's about the healthy things that I do, who I am as a person, who I want to be. You're really focused on that.
Yeah. One of the things that I found is when a person takes their time in stage 4 and stage 5, so between the action and then the maintenance and kind of recreating this new individual identity, right? When they take their time in that process, then they're much better equipped to quickly identify healthy versus unhealthy relationships going forward.
No, I agree. And you know how you're talking about like the previous stage, the action stage, were about having resentment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first 6 months, there's like stage, I think the resentment comes in more in the maintenance stage where like now you're fully identified in this healthy space. So now you're really mourning all the decisions that you make. Whereas in the action stage, it's just early.
Yeah.
Like it's just so toxic. Like you're just glad that you left and things are clearing up for you. So you're just thankful.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're
It's
right.
just really early in that process. You're just thankful to not be in that space anymore. Maintenance is like a year past now.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have this new identity and now the resentment starts to come in. It starts to creep in.
Mm.
Right. And then drugs, this is known as relapse prevention, where like a person can use cocaine because they're curious about it or they're having resentments or they're exploring again, but they're still in the maintenance phase. They just had a relapse and then you just jump back on. You know, so
Interesting.
relationship wise, maybe you'll go back to that partner for a weekend or something, but then you just jump back and you're like, no, this is not good for me.
Yeah.
And then this is where a lot of the resentment and the work through comes in.
Yeah, it's interesting because in a lot of cases, you'll see couples break up and then they'll jump into something else so quickly that they never had a chance to actually work through this identity process, this maintenance process of like rediscovering themselves, of figuring out what they value. And because they're insecure of, you know, might be they're lonely, might be that they need the affection, might be whatever it is, leaning on the next person to kind of cover up these wounds, these pains that need to be addressed individually. And when that happens, they cycle the process. They basically like repeat this process again. They go into this next thing, and you can watch it go in a loop. They
Yeah.
make every one of the same mistakes and then come back out having an identical relationship, essentially.
Yeah, and that's basically being in the pre-contemplation stage. So even though you broke up with that person, you're still you're still in this pain of being in an unhealthy partner, and you're living that pain out.
Yeah.
It's like me going from cocaine to then heroin to now using crystal meth. I'm just cycling a different drug, but I'm still in the pre-contemplation stage.
One of the case studies on this one that I found really interesting was a couple who both essentially divorced, and then they each found, so they basically both divorced, and then they each found each other at the workplace. And they were essentially in this process of action. It was almost like they met during the contemplation, went to action, and then to maintenance, but they did it all together. So they were each other's support through their individual divorces. Then they began to be each other's support through being single, and then they began to date and be each other's support in finding this new identity.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening essentially was they connected on, it's what I would have called like a situational relationship, right? Because the underlying values and everything, it wasn't there. What they were doing was using each other to kind of fill these temporary needs. And these temporary needs were the rebuilding of their individual identities and becoming who they are and whatnot. And so the relationship lasted maybe another 6-7 years, and they married and they went through this, and then it ended in divorce again, because neither of them had had the time to figure out who they were, what they wanted, and they kind of used each other as this support system to the point where they fell in love with each other and then thought that this was real.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example of incremental change, right? It got you out of the previous situation. You're in a better situation, but it's not that much better.
Yeah.
Versus like doing this on your own, really getting yourself clean and straight, and then having a healthy relationship moving forward, where the jump is much bigger.
Yeah, that's what's super fascinating about it, is that in each similar case, it's that incremental change, right? Where they leave something. Another case was, a person that left someone that was abusive. And then, and during that time again, she found somebody to kind of make that process a bit easier. Once she was divorced, then she was openly dating this other person. They dated for about a year. And her marriage, I think, lasted maybe over 10 years, something like that. This new relationship only went for a year. And I was working with her at the time, and I said that, you do what you need to do. But from my perspective, this relationship is better than the one that you were in, but it's still not what you want. And I could point it out to her to the point where she would actually agree. I would say, these are your values. You tell me how this other person meets those values. And she would agree that the other person does not. But it was that emotional crutch that was needed to get her to the next stage of being divorced, being single, and being okay. Then she broke it off and was like, okay, now I'm going to. So each of these relationships got incrementally better, but not to the point where if you just took the time and gained comfort with being alone, gained comfort with who you are, begin to love yourself, begin to provide those things for you, then the next person, you can go from something toxic to something wonderful and healthy in one transition.
Yeah, I think people, they feel like they're taking a shortcut, but it ends up being just worse, and you're just dealing. It's just longer then. It's not even a shortcut. Versus just doing the work, or really working on yourself, and then once you can do that, you can rapidly improve and have healthier relationships.
Yeah.
Right, because once again, it's a drug analogy. I did cocaine. I weaned off of cocaine. Now I'm going to heroin. Then I wean myself off of heroin. Then I do crystal meth. There's temporary breaks, but it's just I'm still in that addicted state.
Yeah. The weird thing is when people are in this state of maintenance, of kind of finding this new identity, especially when they come out of a marriage, let's say that they're married 10 years, like our examples, there seems to be a lot of really what I would find dumb anecdotal advice along the lines of how long you should be single. Well, you should be single for 1 month for every 6 months you were together. You should be single for 1 month for every year that you were together. That's how you can know. And in my opinion, and also in our research, there is no time frame. It is however long it takes for you to discover your underlying values, to gain comfort in who you are, to wake up happy from day to day being alone, and then to move forward. For some people, that might be a couple months. For others, it's a year. But what is all this anecdotal advice on how long?
It's just a lazy, convenient answer to sound good, but it doesn't give you anything meaningful whatsoever.
But people live by this stuff.
Yeah,
My girlfriend's told me that I should be single for at least a year before I date again.
I mean, I guess.
Have you heard this stuff?
Yeah, I've heard it all the time. Where like you need to take, you need to take time, and then when you're ready, you're ready.
Yeah.
But it'll show when you're ready, and people have different stages of when they're ready.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, once you pick a partner, the partner that you choose, and then if they reflect really healthy qualities, that's a sign that it shows that you are ready. Because if you're attracted to things that were about the past, like if I'm picking a person that's into cocaine again, right, and that means that I'm just not healthy and I'm not ready.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the partners that you're attracted to will reflect your new identity in this healthier space, and that's a sign that you're ready.
Yeah.
But some people have ulterior motives though. Like I've met people are, in counseling sessions, they know that this person's healthy and they're trying to force it, but mentally and emotionally, they're just not there. So it's really mentally and emotionally being ready and being that healthy person.
Yeah. Either way though, take the time that you need to gain comfort in yourself.
But whatever that is.
Yeah.
And
Whatever that might be.
When you're ready, you're ready.
Yeah. Okay. So then we move on to the termination and transition, our stage 6.
So this means that you have done your work. You have worked out your resentments and anger and frustration, and you're fully a healthy partner at this point, right? So you're going to choose healthy people. You're going to attract healthy people because you yourself are a healthy partner, mentally and emotionally.
This one's interesting because the resentment aspect, right? In a lot of situations, we're going to have to do a separate episode on this. Someone asked, how do I get over my anger when the things are still happening? And I could relate to that. I'm like, this deserves its own episode, because there are sometimes when you terminate a relationship, it's done and you don't have to deal with that person at all anymore. Other times, like let's say when children are involved, then you don't get a full cutoff, right? You're always going to be connected to the other person, at least until the point where the children are adults on their own, especially when you are still paying alimony and child support and all these different things, right? So what piece of that resentment do you expect to be resolved more quickly? What piece do you feel like is going to linger?
I feel like, I can speak for myself. So, me and my wife, like we both had like really traumatic childhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were fighting all the time and we were holding a lot of resentments towards each other, the ones that I was holding on to were things that I myself, she was just triggering things that I had to still work through.
Mm-hmm.
Like issues with my mother and issues of trust and issues of abandonment and all these kind of things. Once I recognized that that's what it was about, then the resentment started to go away. And same with her, because I triggered things about her father and her father's issues. And once we can separate those things out, that's where the resentment went away.
That to me makes sense. The resentment that can be resolved to me is the stuff that is past. It's the stuff that, it comes from our childhood. It comes from like our own things that we need to address. It comes from past issues that have stopped. The stuff that I feel like continues.
It's present issues. Like for example, like with your ex, Susie, she's presently doing things that are affecting your kids. It's not about a triggered wound that you're trying to work through. It's just, this is presently harming our family. That's a different, that's not even resentment. That's just frustration and anger. I think those are two separate things. Like that's appropriate anger versus resentment being like a trigger, like, wow, okay, something inside of me I still need to work through. I think those are two separate things.
They are, but I feel like they have to be described as different things, and people need to understand that they're not the same thing.
It's differentiating it out.
Because you can easily lump it together where it's all just resentment, but it's not. There's past issues. That's where you have resentment, right? It's anger over past issues, many of which are things that you and I might have done to each other. But if we're no longer together, I need to get past that. And it's also past issues from my personal life, things that you might have triggered, and those are for me to address as well. But when the resentment is about the past, which is no longer relevant, that is resentment. But when it's about things that are currently happening, that is anger. And in many cases, it's like you're okay and right to feel anger in those kind of situations. That's not the piece that you're being forced to, because it can almost sound like, I think in a lot of cases, people can think that the idea of forgiveness and getting over resentment has to do with somebody repeatedly making the same mistakes over and over. And we get this a lot. How do I forgive someone who's continually doing the same thing? You don't. You create a boundary, you separate and do it as much as possible. But when that thing is continuously being done to you, it's kind of like saying, how do I let this wound heal if somebody keeps cutting it open every day? Exactly. You don't. It doesn't heal.
Yeah, I mean, there's an accountability component. And then forgiveness, it's not about letting someone off the hook. It's just setting a boundary that you're not going to feed into this anymore.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're not going to forget this. You're just going to allow yourself not to be emotionally attached to the thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, when we worked together, like when you were talking about Susie, like it was separating out the resentment of the choices you made and accepting that, yeah, I chose her and I made these decisions, owning that resentment, which no longer became resentment. And now it's just more about day-to-day living and solving issues.
I feel like personally, it's easy to mix those two. And I see it in the questions that people are being asked.
They get enmeshed for sure.
Yeah.
People, like there's not an awareness of what you're doing.
For sure. And myself included, it was like when I knew that I needed to get over the resentment piece, it was lumping it all together. I was putting everything into this thing and coming to the realization like, okay, you can't. Like, and it was a funny thing because I'd written my book, actually, I had said that you can look at a spiritual example, you can look at real life examples, you can look at any example you want, but there is no forgiveness with a repeated offense. Meaning, like, even if you want to look at the spiritual case of it, like you want to go to Christianity, right? You can look at the topic of forgiveness and see that where there is no change of heart, there is no forgiveness. So we know, even from a spiritual example in this, that there is no forgiveness or moving past something when you continually do that thing. And in life, in any example, it's the same thing. Like, would you continuously give $100 to a person that just keeps gambling it away, no matter who they are? And if you do continue to do that thing and they keep telling you like, oh no, this time it's different. Oh no, this time is different. Oh no, this time is different. There's no forgiving that person because you are repeatedly, that person is doing the same thing over and over. But you do have the choice to set a boundary and no longer give that person the money.
Yeah. And once you forge that individual identity, that's where forgiveness comes into play.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think for both of us, that's where we were able to forgive.
Yes.
Right? Like if you didn't know yourself and you didn't have this new identity, how can you forgive that person? Because you haven't even forgiven yourself. Whereas I feel like that's what you did. And once you got to that forgiveness stage, which is the termination stage, your new identity, that's where real forgiveness can begin. If you're in those other stages, even maintenance, and you have relapses and you're going through things, it's harder to forgive because you haven't fully formed your new identity yet.
For sure. But for me, the resentment piece was really easy to let go of once I had properly defined what it was. When resentment was enmeshed with the current wrongs that are being done, then I couldn't let go of anything because it was like, no, these things are still happening and I'm still angry. But when we defined the pieces that were past and gone, then it was easy. I can move past that. That's fine.
Yeah.
And I can still have the right to be upset about the things that are happening that I have no control of because this is the law and this is what I'm required to do. And so that can be its own separate issue, basically, that I can work on separately.
Yeah, they're no longer enmeshed and you're able to separate it out.
Yeah.
And the appropriate frustration versus resentment.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, okay. So 6 stages.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's like a drug, man. You got to wean yourself off. And you got to go through all the stages to be a healthy partner and a healthy person. Because if not, if you cheat yourself, you're just staying in those stages. Mm-hmm. You're staying in the previous stages.
What about the idea of, since we're talking like a drug addiction, going cold turkey.
Yeah, I mean, if you can do that, but you're still kind of going through the stages, right? Because you're still okay. To get to quitting cold turkey, that means that you at least are contemplating it.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking action, and then from there, the maintenance would have to come into play. And then, can you maintain, or can you take the action for at least 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, I mean, I guess so. But that means that you're mentally and emotionally prepared to do that.
Yeah, this was I asked this because when it comes to this 6-stage process, like you said, everybody goes through it. It's going to be different speeds. The difference of cold turkey versus taking time going through the process isn't skipping steps. It's just speeding them up. And the difference of cold turkey isn't necessarily that much faster. I guess what I'm getting at is that in this process of breaking something off, a lot of people around you, especially your closest friends, they might have opinions on how you should be doing it. You know, you just can't do this anymore. You just got to stop. You got to ghost them. You know, like everybody has their own approach, right? Oh, you're going to break up with somebody, you ghost them. Don't ever talk to them again. And other people are more along the lines of, no, if you're going to break up, you want to sit down, have a conversation, be done with it, do it respectfully. If, you know, there's 1 or 2 phone calls or whatever. And then other people would say things like, yeah, after you break it off, it makes complete sense if you, kind of mess up and sleep with them again and, do that kind of stuff. But then you got to like stop, but slowly get yourself away. Everybody has a completely different approach to this. And it's difficult to say any one of them are right or wrong. What I could probably say is that you're better off moving through these stages, hopefully a little bit quicker than slower.
I see what you're saying. So like if you're like the cold turkey analogy, or you cut the relationship out, that's probably a sign that you're really ready and you're going to accelerate through this process.
It's also a difference in personality, though, I've noticed. People that are able to cut off a relationship cold turkey, or let's say I've seen people date for months and then break up in a text and ghost the person. That is a personality trait. And I would almost say maybe even an unhealthy one. Whereas like for me personally, if I'm going to break up, I'm going to do it respectfully. I'm going to try to maintain a friendship with boundaries. If that doesn't work, I'm going to take it to the next step where now I got to say, stop. But I'm going to allow it to kind of go through that process. And I like to respect that. If I can maintain the friendship there, if it's possible, then I'll try. But then there's people that believe that there's nothing there to maintain. There's no friendship that's possible to be saved. And there's people on the opposite side where they have no boundaries whatsoever. It's a very interesting thing because I think a lot of people are very opinionated about the way you should go through this process, these 6 stages.
Well, I think, the actions have to match the mental and emotional energy behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're genuinely trying to change, the actions will reflect it. So whether you're ghosting or not, if it's within this healthy space of doing it, then it's okay. But if it's not, and you're just kind of like diverting or distracting yourself, or you're not really dealing with issues, even though you're doing the act, it's really not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah,
It's the intention behind it. It's the intention, the mental and emotional intention behind your actions.
Mm.
And I think this is more reflective of the mental and emotional person you're becoming, which then is reflected through your actions.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's, versus just doing the actions and it looks like it, but mentally and emotionally, you're not doing it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the important step for each of us is to kind of understand these different stages and what we're doing in those stages. And there's certain ones like the pre-contemplating stage that we could speed up, stop overvaluing a toxic relationship right now and overvaluing the positive and kind of being fearful of the change or the leave aspect, leaving the relationship. And
you have to assess the level of unhealthiness. Like if it's really toxic, like borderline abusive,
mm-hmm.
I think ghosting is good.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
In
So
that instance.
it's a level of toxicity that you're dealing with and then the appropriate actions with that.
Yeah. But in each of these stages, there's kind of like these warning signs, if you're calling people a lot and like trying to unload your emotional frustrations, then you know that you're in this contemplative kind of pre-contemplative stage,
Exactly.
to slow yourself down. You know that if you're in the stage of just being grateful and like gone, separated from it, you know, you're probably in that action stage. And maybe it's a good time to start working on the maintenance side before you go and jump into another relationship. But in each of these instances, there's kind of a guide to know, hey, this is things to be aware of, things that you can work on and do so on your own time frame.
Yeah, ultimately, this is the stages of a relationship with yourself and leaving an unhealthy relationship and getting your individuality back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. I'd like to almost want to do the same topic, but apply to different areas, but
Let's do it.
it's cool. All right, guys, hope you all enjoyed the episode. If you would like individual coaching or couples coaching, you can jump on to 12weekrelationships.com where you can sign up for a free 15-minute consult with Dr. Glen. We're going to be starting a waiting list soon because we do have quite a few inquiries that are coming in, and we are very grateful for that. So thank you for all the support. In the meantime, if you want to help out the podcast, you guys can help us by jumping onto the iTunes store. I believe it's the iTunes. And go to the podcast and find us. Leave us a review. A positive one would be helpful. And if you guys have questions or negative reviews, critique, anything like that, shoot us a DM on Instagram at 12week relationships. We don't do advice over DMs, but we just might bring your topics into our next podcast. And that's it for us. See you guys next time.
Thank you.